And I'm going to, turn it over to Tony, Nick, and John, and just, kind of get, I would say, Tony, from your perspective, you were in there with GIPSA and obviously with FGIS, so kind of get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and just to clarify, I do work out of Washington, D.C., but don't hold that against me. I'm a native Ohioan. I know we had some Andersons, folks from the Andersons in here earlier. I'm originally from Waterville, Ohio, so I try not to think of myself as too much of a Beltway insider, but the longer I stay there, I don't know. Yeah. Like just touched on, the mission of FGIS is to facilitate the marketing of grain. And we do that a few different ways. We set up standards. We work under a law called the U.S. Grain Standards Act, which establishes uniform standards for 12 grains. It's been around for a little over 100 years now, like corn, wheat, soybeans, sorghum, canola, oats, a number of others. And that establishes the grade criteria, U.S. number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What does that mean? How do you do it? We also do the procedures so that we inspect it all uniformly across the country, whether you're in Toledo, Ohio, or New Orleans, or Olympia, wherever it is. That's our goal. We're facilitators. That's our primary mission. So when Secretary Perdue came on in 2017, he looked at the overall organization of USDA, and he made a change in May to set up a undersecretary for trade. That was as called for in the 2014 Farm Bill. And in FGIS, we kind of thought maybe that was it, because there was some talk about moving us around maybe. But when we didn't do it in May, I thought, well, that might be it. But then in September, Secretary Perdue announced that we're going to be ending GIPSA, eliminating GIPSA as an agency and getting rolled into with the Agricultural Marketing Service. And if you don't know much about the Agricultural Marketing Service, they have all the grading programs within USDA. So when you see dairy, eggs, when you see meat, USDA Prime, Choice, people always used to ask me, "Oh, are you guys the ones that do the Prime and the Choice?" I said, well, not really. It's somebody else. Well, now it is. Yeah, we're in that same group now with the Agricultural Marketing Service. So the goal of the reorganization was to be more efficient and more service-oriented. And with our name, the Federal Grain Inspection Service, we didn't have to change the name. The S stands for service. We want to make sure that's clear. We might not be able to always give you the result that you want, but we want to make sure that we do it in a timely, consistent, unbiased fashion to facilitate, help the trade and price discovery. I do have to announce one of my colleagues in the room here, Mr. Ron Bundy. If you got any particularly challenging questions, if you ever had an appeal grade that didn't hold up the way you wanted it to, Mr. Bundy is over there. He is our field office manager in Kansas City, and Ron helps oversee the official agencies, and his office does a lot of the appeal work. So if you've got a federal appeal and it goes to Kansas City, Ron's office is going to handle it. We also do the licensing and a lot of training and work with the official agencies. So Ron's new to that office in Kansas City. He came from also Toledo. He took that job about a month ago. So Ron's here to field the tough questions and answer questions about the appeals that you didn't like. So that's really, I used to work also for an official agency. So I used to work for an official agency. John used to work for FGIS. So I'm not sure who's the mole where. But we work really well together. And I want to say we have a very good working relationship with NGFA and NEGA both, and a lot of our stakeholders. At least that's what they tell me to my face. So,
it's true, Tony. I think we have a good relationship.
Appreciate being here today, and thanks.
So, from the industry perspective, I'd like to echo some of the comments both Jess and Tony made. We had a major service disruption for the grain industry, right? And several people obviously aware of that, several people involved in dealing with that situation. And there was a lot of, I dare say, hard feelings from the industry's perspective. And I like Tony's reference to it. I've heard Secretary Perdue on numerous occasions say, we're going to put the service back in Federal Grain Inspection Service. And I think if you'd ask many people in the grain industry, particularly the export industry, you would have heard folks say it went from FGIS to FGIR, Federal Grain Inspection Regulators. And there was a sore sentiment within the industry, didn't feel like the agency was truly living out that mission of facilitating the marketing of U.S. grains and oilseeds. And so, Tony's right, we pushed for reorganization. The industry, NGFA and NEGA were highly involved in the ear of Secretary Perdue saying, you know, we needed to see a change and get the grain inspection service back aligned with the rest of the USDA inspection and grading agencies. And really what, you know, our key point was around the effective, efficient, and consistent grading of grains and oilseeds in the supply chain. And I think it's real fair to say, from the industry perspective, we've seen a new approach in the agency. You know, with Tony in the field management division position and Dana Cole coming into the acting deputy administrator, we've seen that outreach. We've, you know, industry, and I know some of the companies represented here, your representatives that sit on NGFA and NEGA committees, you know, we've been asked for feedback. What can the agency do better? How can they help us? How can they continue to live out that mission of facilitating the marketing of grains and oilseeds? And so we've seen that change, and I think it's fair to say under previous leadership, I think it felt more like lip service. We'd be asked the questions, but we never saw anything done. And now we're seeing, you know, actions taken, whether it's by Technology and Sciences Division or Field Management Division, Policies and Procedures, Market Analysis Branch. We're seeing that a new leaf, and I think you know, the relationships that, you know, particularly Jess has worked to build, the committees have worked to build. We've seen a much better relationship with Federal Grain Inspection Service, and I think we've got reason as an industry to feel positive about that and the opportunity we have to continue to partner going forward with the agency so that we don't have those service disruptions, and, you know, that mission of facilitating the marketing of grains and oilseeds is truly lived out day to day.
John.
Thanks, Jess. From an official agency standpoint, we're pleased with the way things are going right now. Frankly, we had some of the same frustrations that I think you folks were having in the past. This has been explained earlier. When GIPSA was formed, we started getting political appointees without really a lot of grain experience. They came from the livestock marketing side of things. And, you know, that may have worked for a while we had some upper management within the senior level of government employees that understood what it was like, and that very cordial relationship that you have with the railroads out there that we also have to deal with you in scheduling our people and everything. So we were very pleased that now we're seeing folks that are back in the service end side of things that's being emphasized, and also that level of senior management at the Tony level who have been out there probing rail cars and understand the issues that you're faced, because as official agencies we really do feel like we're in it together. And just as you were frustrated sometimes in getting answers to questions because time and other issues, it's you need something now. We were caught in that same trap with you folks, I think. And we're certainly pleased to see that we are getting answers. We can move forward, and we're moving forward with people with an understanding of your industry, and we think that's a benefit to everybody, and we're very happy about that.
I think one thing to point out too is, for those of you who may not know, you know, the current Secretary of Agriculture, Sonny Perdue, you know, the former governor of Georgia, you know, I think he's one of the very few Secretary of Agricultures that has an experience, a background with the grain elevator. And before he became involved in politics, he used to run a grain elevator. And he was very involved with the National Grain and Feed Association too. In fact, before he was appointed to the Secretary of Agriculture position, he was serving on our board of directors. So we have somebody at that level within the administration with their knowledge of the industry. And as FGIS said, well, it's a little bit different than it's been in the past, right? Usually you have somebody at the high level within the administration that has more of a producer background. And now you have somebody in leadership that has a grain elevator background.
From what we understand, Secretary Perdue is intimately familiar with the operations of FGIS, which is really good.
Yeah, and when that comes to the grain quality issue, as we know, grain quality is a very important part of our business, right? I mean, grain quality, I mean, that's how the industry operates. I mean, that's the, you know, the prices, you know, the grades, it's a critical issue. So that's just, you know, for the group, just a little background on, you know, working with the administration. So a couple of questions I have for y'all. I just, Tony, I think, just curious, from the grain inspection standpoint, where is it at? I mean, as I understand, we've reached some record levels as far as the amount of grain that's actually been inspected by FGIS.
Yeah, as far as exports go, which for those of you that don't know, like on the export side, for the most part, FGIS does the inspections ourselves. So where we've got those export port locations where we're loading ships 24/7, 365, federal inspectors are out there, and also delegated states like Washington, Virginia, Alabama, Wisconsin, South Carolina. So that's the part, that's the export side of things. Now that's all fed by the domestic stuff that gets shipped down that way. But like Jess said, we've had record exports. It's been very encouraging. Last year, we go by, if you go by fiscal year or market year, in 2017 was the biggest year ever for exports. We exported 145 million metric tons out of the U.S., and that's just grain, so it doesn't count like pulses or rice or anything like that. And that was the most, as far back as we can go in the 80s, 70s, anything. So that's encouraging to be part of an industry and a sector that's growing. And this year, we're on pace to be the second highest year for exports all time. So a lot of that was continuing the push that we saw in the fall. We have our busiest months in the fall and wintertime. So we've heard a lot of talk about trade, of course, but as far as exports go, right now we're on pace to be the second most all time. From an inspection standpoint in general, a lot of the grain that moves down to the Gulf into the PNW for export comes from the official agencies and comes from your interior elevators. So we've seen similarly high inspections on that side. It's been some big years for sure. And this is following up on the drought of like 2012, 2013.
Yeah.
We thought, man, this might be hope this is not the new normal. And we've had busier years, bigger years ever since.
And so, John, what does that mean then from the official agency perspective? If as Tony was saying, you've had the record years in inspections for FGIS.
Certainly, that's a good thing for official agencies too, as they're trying to maintain a group of people that are trained to perform, especially their inspectors, and keep their lines and have those people to have them around. We, as the official agency folks, we over the years, the number of official agencies have been reduced, sometimes for efficiency sakes and that sort of thing, where some agencies have taken on other territories and that sort of thing. It seems pretty stable at the moment right now. We also had a phase in there where a lot of agencies were operated by states, state departments of agriculture, and those have kind of went away. I think some of that may have happened more back in the eons ago when we were getting into on-site loading and that sort of thing, and dealing with those trains coming in at different times. And some states were a little better equipped with their personnel to be able to be flexible, where other states weren't. And so some of those states kind of decided maybe it was better to turn that over to some private sector folks. So we're looking at pretty stable folks right now. We're not, as far as the number of agencies and that sort of thing. There's with your industry, there's always consolidation when efficiencies can be found. But it looks pretty stable right now. And, as far as we're all watching the trade issues just like you are, because it impacts us just as well as it impacts you.
Nick?
So the comment I'd like to add, Jess, is, I appreciate hearing from Tony the record years. Us in the industry, we know we're still handling a lot of grain year in and year out. And so I think from my perspective, or from the industry perspective, right, it just highlights the importance of the relationship that we have both with FGIS and the official agencies for that timely service, accuracy of the service, transparency of the agency, because that's what we need, right? If we can't get grades on the train or on the barge or on the vessel, and now we're starting to get into demerge and performance issues, from our own industry, drives down our operational performance. And so to me, it just highlights that need to have a strong service that can get us accurate, timely grades so that we can continue to move our grain. And if I could, Jess, I'd actually in that vein, I'd like to actually throw a question out to Tony that I think maybe some folks in the industry would be curious to hear from. So if we're getting more focus on the service, what types of programs or actions is the agency putting in place to monitor and manage inspector performance? Because I think all of us that use FGIS or official agencies, we can probably say, oh man, so-and-so's grading tonight, it's not going to go well. So can you maybe talk about, what the agency is doing?
Yeah, we've got a number of programs within our quality assurance and compliance division and for quality assurance, quality control to monitor the quality of the inspections going on both by the FGIS folks and the official agencies. Number one, we save a lot of grain. So if there's ever an issue, we can always go back and look. So we save file samples like on rail cars for 10 days, barges 30 days. If there's ever an issue, we can go back. We save 2-3 pounds at least of grain. We can go back and review that, and we pull those samples randomly to monitor our inspectors out in the field. We also, on the export side, we save every separation. So when we separate out the kernels that are damaged or HVAC in durum wheat or in wheat of other class, depending on what market you're in, we save those samples so that we can we send our inspectors. We randomly select one every week for review, and our inspectors' performance is based on the results of those samples. We are looking at tweaks to that program to make what we're picking most relevant, but that's where we're at right now. We also have one of the foundations of our system is licensing or authorization. So anybody that's going to be working in one of your facilities has been licensed or tested or authorized by FGIS. They've got to be trained up. They've got to demonstrate that they're trained to our quality assurance specialists, and then they come into our office, or we send a test out there to where they are, and they take an exam, a proficiency exam, written and a practical. That's for all FGIS and official agency folks. And then again, we monitor them from there out. And one of the keys is the timely monitoring. So I want to make sure that when we get those samples in, we review them and then send it back out to the inspector for feedback. And if there's ever any major issues, first of all, if there's ever a big issue, we usually hear about it from the customer. And please don't be shy. If there is ever a big problem where you don't think for whatever reason that the grades are what you had in mind, we need to know about it, because if we find out a week later or something about, we had a real tough time making corn damage last harvest, it's harder for us to, it's still good feedback, but it's harder for us to take immediate action. So because we do save a lot, we can require folks to save more and get that line dialed in. We understand the nature of the business, that it's 24/7. Our inspectors and our supervisors, quality assurance specialists know that. Ron's got a staff of folks. They can hit the road right now and go out and do site visits if needed, if there's really a major issue on odor or anything else. So we've got several training programs in the works. Our agency was created back in the late 70s, and a lot of those folks, there was a big hiring. There was a series of scandals in the industry, and the agency was created in the late 70s to require mandatory inspections, and there was a couple thousand people in the organization back then. We've pared down from there, but we had a lot of folks with 40 years of experience and that are now retiring. So we have some new inspectors coming up, and we've got a number of training programs to make sure that they're of the same quality of the folks that have been doing it for 40 years.
So, John, when did you start working for FGIS?
A long time ago. It was, 1980, I guess. And I, too, worked for an official agency before that. And before that, I worked unpaid for my father, who was an inspector for the state of Florida when he had to sample cars by himself. So, yes, it is an issue. And from an official agency standpoint, we're constantly, to an official agency manager person, I can tell you there's not a one out there that doesn't want those supervision samples sooner back to know what's going on. So Mr. Bundy, I'm sure he's probably, in his limited time he's been here, has already heard from everyone. And that's something that we bring up all the time because, again, we realize how important that is. We want it to be right, too. And, we realize it's part of our business and our integrity to you that we need to have those right. So we're constantly pushing them too for our own benefit. So yes.
Just want to throw out there too, our system is built on transparency and the opportunity for review. So for almost any sample, if you really disagree with the result, you can ask for a reinspection there on site. You can have an appeal done at the field office. It's either at export or domestic. And you can even send it to the Board of Appeals and Review for a board appeal. So just want to promote that. And if there are any quality issues out there, or any Any issues with consistency, timeliness, anything like that, just we need to know about it.
Well, I think a question that I always get too, for those that may not be as familiar with the process, but how do the boundaries work? You know, you see the boundaries that they have for these officially designated inspection agencies, and sometimes they change, sometimes they don't. How does that process work?
Want to field that one?
You can.
So the boundaries were set up. They've been in effect for decades, and they serve two primary functions. We want to make sure that anybody in the country can get service from an official provider, whether that's us or whether that's an official agency. So when an official agency applies for a territory, they have to cover all the work in that area, whether it's a really profitable shuttle train loader that does 4 or 5 shuttles a week and makes all kinds of money, or if it's the one that has just a handful of rail cars or trucks that need probes every handful a month. We want to make sure they can get service. That's the primary. We don't want them to say, "Oh, call the office in New Orleans," and they'll drive up 8 hours because nobody else wants to serve that. So that's one big benefit, is that everybody gets service. The second thing is there is a intentional prevention of competition or conflict. So once the agency is awarded that territory, no other agency, with few exceptions, can go in there and provide service. That provides the integrity. This is by law, by the U.S. Grain Standards Act. The integrity that, okay, we know that if I don't give a grade that Nick likes today, he's not going to call up John tomorrow and see what John might give him. So there are benefits and negatives around that. But for us at FGIS, we implement the law, and that's what Congress come up with. And I think the system, by and large, works pretty well. I think that we have service. I think that there are some limited means to get other agencies to provide service if they can't do it in a timely fashion. But I think overall it works okay.
I guess I would add what Nick said. From an official agency standpoint, and maybe first from a historical standpoint, let me say this, that ever since the inception of boundaries, some very good, honest people have differed on whether boundaries should be, and we've had this debate many times over the years, and I don't think it's probably ever going to go away. So from one standpoint, our official agencies, even within them, there are members that have different opinions about boundaries and that sort of thing. As an association, we do realize, as Tony said, without some sort of mechanism, some people are going to get left out. Okay, so that needs to be there. So that's pretty much our stand on boundaries, is that we think there is a benefit for the greater system and for the system to flourish. We do need some boundaries in that standpoint. Now, as far as boundaries, and what I like to say is, how porous should the boundaries be? When are there times that it might be best for someone else to be able to come in or something like that? That's a whole nother issue, and just another aspect of boundaries that has come up over the years that we've dealt with. But from an official agency standpoint, again, we're going to have to deal with whatever FGIS comes up with, and we'll work with it the best we can. But we do see some advantages, obviously, to everybody getting service.
And we'll deal with whatever Congress comes up with.
Well, and I was going to say, has FGIS, have there ever been any considerations for modifying or changing the boundaries?
So as far as the boundaries go, they technically could change every time that they're up for renewal. Like the designation period used to be 3 years. There was a change in 2015 to up the designation period to 5 years. So anybody could apply for a designation, and they could specify in their application what territory they wanted to cover. Now, what has happened throughout history, by and large, is that the same agency will apply for the same territory, and it's continued. Now, there has been some consolidation. There have been situations where agencies go out of business and we divide up territories, and that's all through a public comment process. So it's possible they could change. It's possible they have changed throughout the years, but by and large, the same agencies end up establishing a good business model, and they apply for same territory, and usually do a good job, and they get redesignated. That's the majority of cases.
Is that true, John?
Yes, that's true. The only, I would add that there have been situations where, especially in states, where a state, as I mentioned earlier, just decided we're through. Okay, we don't want to do this anymore. The state of Minnesota is an example of that. So you have a whole territory that comes up that, okay, how are we going to service this? So typically what happens, that goes out in the Federal Register. You folks have an opportunity to comment. And typically at that situation, we may have multiple folks that are asking to inspect rain in that area. And some of them may say, as Tony said, some of them may say, I want these 5 counties because they're adjacent to me and I can make my business plan work there. Somebody else may say, we want this. So, you know, they kind of come in what works with their business plan. And sometimes we get no county. We would get no counties. Nobody wants this county. Well, at that point in time, that's when FGIS would say, somebody's got to service that county, okay? And through a process of in their applications, they have to say how they're going to do what they're going to do in those counties, what resources they bring to bear, how they're going to get people, where they're going to put offices. All that's laid out, what they're going to charge. So then, as the law reads, as I believe it still reads, Tony, it hasn't been changed, FGIS has the discretion to determine who is in best position to provide service. So based on the overall evaluation, FGIS will make that determination and basically draw some lines. So some people might get some area they didn't want, but it's kind of take it or somebody else is going to take this part. So it's more of an art than a science, I might say, to make sure that everybody gets covered and everybody gets covered efficiently. Those are the situations I think where, you know, a true boundary change would be there. And you know, when we start talking about boundaries, obviously our membership of, you know, and FGIS is going to make changes. Our membership gets a little nervous as to what could happen. Needless to say, there's potential for winners and losers. But just in another scenario, that's how some boundaries could change besides in consolidations. But in each one of those, the industry, you folks get an opportunity to make a public statement as to who you think would be best able to provide service.
And that's the comment that I wanted to make to this group. You know, we as industry members, we've got the opportunity for our voice to be heard. You know, when designations open up, our you know, territories, that's our opportunity as an industry, whether it's through NGFA and NEGA or as individual companies. You know, if we have a concern about the service provider in our area, particularly when their designation is up for renewal, that's our time to chime in. And I think, Jess, it's probably fair to say in 80 to 90% of the designations that have been opened in the last 10, since you've been with NGFA, we've probably had minimal comments, I would say.
That's true.
But I also know through the trade associations, we have been dealing with some issues from specific grain companies. And so, you know, my ask of this group of industry folks is, you know, make your voice heard, whether that's through NGFA and NEGA, through when comments are open, or directly. That's our opportunity to get that feedback back to FGIS. And I can tell you just from the personal relationships that I have with Tony and Dana at that level of the organization, they want to hear from us. I mean, I have heard every time I've spoken with Dana Cole, she's always asked, what feedback do you have for us? What can we do better as a Federal Grain Inspection Service? They want to hear that from us. And so that's our opportunity as industry to get that feedback. Now, I would follow that up to say we may not get what we want, right? We had a pretty long agenda for reauthorization in 2015. We didn't get everything we wanted, so we have to deal with that fact. But if we don't ask for it, if we don't make our voice heard, then we're not going to get it. And so that's my ask of us as industry members is, you know, get that feedback, whether it's through your representation on the Grades and Inspections Committee, the Grain Grades and Weights Committee, directly to Jess, directly to somebody else on NGFA staff. That's our obligation as industry, make sure we provide that feedback.
And just to follow up what Nick is saying too, you know, from the trade association standpoint, some of these issues can be very difficult from the antitrust standpoint, right? Because it may be that one company may have a very good relationship with one officially designated agency and another company may not, right? And so, you know, if taking a position that might benefit one company over another is a very delicate line from a trade association standpoint that, you know, we can't take. And so as Nick was saying, when you see these notices in the Federal Register, because I'm sure you read that every day, right? Everyone gets online, you read the Federal, for those of us inside the Beltway, it's kind of like, the new, it's a daily read. We always check what's the notice in the Federal Register. But as Tony was saying, they'll put the announcements. FGIS will officially say, hey, it's time for the designation for this area. We're also looking at the boundaries too. They may say, hey, we're looking at maybe adjusting the boundaries. And if your company might be directly impacted by this, that's the opportunity to provide your comments. And I think that's what I think it's very important. But from the trade association, we can make you aware. But from us taking a position on that, that's difficult to do. So, but I think that's a good segue into another issue that I think is many of you may have been dealing with, but it's the exceptions program. And, there's been a change to the exceptions program that some of you may be aware of that occurred in the Reauthorization Act in 2015. And so there's a new policy that FGIS has regarding exceptions. So,
Yeah, I can field that one. So in the 2015 reauthorization, Congress inserted language that replaced some language about exceptions. So we used to have a program where if a customer hadn't gotten service from FGIS or the official agency for a period of 90 days, then they could come to us and say, hey, we haven't used anybody. We'd like to use this neighboring agency or somebody else. And that program started in various forms in the late 90s, early 2000s. It was implemented in varying ways, either very more liberally or conservatively, granting a lot or not granting many. So the law was changed to change that 90-day non-use portion and remove it and put in a provision that if a grain elevator and both agencies, like the incumbent one and the neighboring one, can agree, then the other agency can provide service in that territory. What ended up happening is they seldom agree. Like a lot of times when these agencies set up operations, they are more than willing to provide service at these locations. There were situations where even if somebody did agree in the first place, we would allow that agency to provide service. We want the best service out there. Anyway, so the way it was implemented, it ended up canceling a lot of existing exceptions. I'm not sure if that was the intent or not, but that's how it happened. So in 2017, when we implemented that law by our policy, a lot of exceptions were canceled, and that prompted some in Congress to want to take action to change the law again to make some kind of different way of handling that. And so now, in the appropriations language for this last fiscal year, there was language inserted that FGIS can no longer use any appropriations to cancel any more exceptions. Now, by and large, a lot of the really high volume or high dollar ones were probably the first ones to go. So the ones remaining maybe weren't as big or as interesting. Another thing that is going on now is there's been a proposal in the House version of the Farm Bill to change the way that exceptions program is implemented, to perhaps allow agencies and customers that had their exceptions canceled to get them back. And that language was in the House version of the Farm Bill. It was not in the Senate version. And so I think it's one of the topics they're going to cover as it goes to conference. As far as FGIS's role in that, like I said, we implement the law at the will of the Congress. So whatever they come up with, we're happy to give. We always will provide a technical review, say how this would be implemented, how this, what this really means. But as far as recommending, USDA does sometimes take positions, but I don't think we have on this issue.
Does AGWA have a position on the exceptions policy, John?
Well, AGWA, from an association standpoint, is made up of winners and losers in this game. Therefore, we have no position. And there's also the antitrust situation. That's not to say that we don't have individual agencies that have very strong opinions and will be, are making those known. We were asked after this, several months ago, time-wise, maybe the first of the year, we were asked as AGWA, moving forward, what did we think about exceptions and how they should be handled, either the existing ones we have or moving forward. We have gotten back to FGIS on that with how we would basically interpret exceptions and how we think they should be handled. Our big takeaway is exceptions should be based on customer service for you folks. It should be based on what your needs are and getting the best service out there for you. In saying that, what we're thinking, what our point is, exceptions serve several purposes. We see the official system, it shouldn't matter who you get service from. They should all be the same. But we know that's not the case. And anytime somebody says, we want another agency, we believe it's imperative that FGIS immediately start looking into that and seeing what's going on and trying to fix that problem, real or perceived, whatever it is. That being said, that may take some time. And again, we've got that cordial relationship out there that we're dealing with, and things have got to move. So if there's another agency that's willing to come in there and help, we think that's a good thing for the official system. It doesn't give us a black eye as a system across the board. Additionally to that, with these exception programs, it also forces official agencies to continually improve to provide you service, the type of service you need, when you need it, how you need it. Because if that agency you have assigned to you is not doing it and someone else comes in, well, guess what? You know, that's probably going to keep moving everybody forward. Whereas if we don't have that opportunity, we may not get that incentive. So there's actually a business incentive through the Inception program for official agencies to improve their service to you folks. So again, we see it as moving forward, we'll deal with what our Congress says and how FGIS does it, has us implement it. But we see some exceptions. The exceptions, there are some positive things there if well managed by FGIS for the betterment of everybody.
Well, I know we're getting a little short on time here. I don't know if you all have any final comments before we wrap things up.
On behalf of FGIS, we appreciate being here. I'm sorry, Dana Cole, our acting deputy administrator, I'm remiss I didn't mention her earlier. She came over during this reorganization from the AMS dairy program. Had a long-standing history, very highly regarded in the department, and she came over to help manage us through this transition. And she's our acting deputy administrator, the head career person in FGIS. She was invited to be here today. She couldn't. I'm sorry. And so you got me instead. So,
well, thank
but
you.
Dana's great. I can give you her contact information if you'd like it.
Just the final thought I'd like to share with the group here is, you know, NGFA and NEGA are a strong advocate for our positions as industry, particularly as it relates to the relationship with FGIS. You know, we've got some key things on the horizon. We've mentioned the exceptions program. We've got the opening of the grain standards for corn, soybeans, and canola. And so, you know, folks in this room need to know NGFA and NEGA, they have our best interests as industry. And so, again, as I mentioned, we need to be providing our comments and feedback when we get requests from NGFA or NEGA so that our voice can be heard and we can get our comments on record to any of those, you know, public comment opportunities that we have. And so please, you know, if you've got somebody from your company that's on the grades and inspections or grain grades and weights committees, you know, please make sure they're active and so that we are getting that feedback and getting those comments back to the agency.
John?
I would just say thanks NGFA and Granger all for having us here for AGWA today. It's always good to talk to our customers and hear what you've got to say. I'm going to be here for the rest of the meeting today and tomorrow, so if anybody's got anything they'd like to bring up, I'd certainly be welcome to talk to you about anything about official inspection service that you're receiving. Thank you.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much. Appreciate it.